Welcome to this journey through one of the most haunting medical mysteries in American Appalachian history. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will move you in a way few other accounts can. A tale where science, superstition, and inexplicable tragedy collided in the mountains of West Virginia, leaving scars that some say never truly healed. We're about to delve into a mystery that consumed an entire community, where the most fundamental promise of human existence, the birth of children, suddenly ceased without explanation and left a legacy so disturbing that government records were sealed for decades. A place where medicine failed, where faith wavered, and where desperate people turned to answers that defied all rational understanding. It was the year 1953. The Korean War was entering its final brutal months. The Soviet Union had just detonated its first hydrogen bomb. America was experiencing unprecedented prosperity, new highways carved through ancient mountains. Television sets glowed in living rooms, and optimism seemed to be the national religion. The future promised nothing but progress. But in Shepherd's Hollow, West Virginia, the future was dying. The hollow itself was a geographical anomaly, a narrow valley carved between two massive ridges of the Appalachian Mountains, accessible only by a single winding dirt road that became impassable during heavy rains. The valley stretched approximately 4 miles in length, but never exceeded half a mile in width, creating a claustrophobic corridor where the sun reached the valley floor for only a few hours each day. There, between mist-covered peaks that seemed to lean inward like protective, or perhaps imprisoning arms, 317 people lived in a community that had existed largely unchanged since the 1800s. They were coal miners, subsistence farmers, and their families. People whose ancestors had settled this land 5 generations prior, drawn by rich coal seams and the promise of isolation from a world they neither trusted nor understood. The mountains were everything here. They provided coal for heat and income. They offered limestone caves for cold storage and shelter during the devastating tornadoes that occasionally tore through the region. They supplied game, deer, turkey, rabbit, that supplemented meager pantries. And they enforced a kind of natural quarantine, keeping the people of Shepherd's Hollow separate from the rapidly modernizing world beyond. In winter, the hollow became a place of profound darkness. Snow accumulated in drifts that could bury a man standing upright. The wind howled through the narrow valley with a sound that older residents compared to the screaming of souls in torment. Ice formed in thick sheets on the creek that ran the length of the valley, the same creek that provided water for drinking, bathing, and the small-scale farming that supplemented the community's diet. The houses were modest, rough wooden structures with tar paper roofs, most lacking indoor plumbing or electricity even in the 1950s. Smoke from coal stoves hung in the cold air, creating a perpetual haze that made the already dim valley even darker. Laundry hung on lines between houses, frozen solid in winter, a surreal gallery of suspended domestic life. But for all its harshness, Shepherd's Hollow had always had one thing in abundance: children. This was a place where families had 6, 8, 10 children. Where the schoolhouse, a single room heated by a potbelly stove, overflowed with students ranging from age 5 to 16. Where the sound of children playing echoed through the valley from dawn until dusk, a constant reminder of life's persistence in even the most challenging environments. Until the spring of 1953, until the births stopped, Margaret Thorne was the first to notice, though she wouldn't recognize the significance until much later. Margaret served as the community's midwife, a role she'd inherited from her mother and grandmother before her. At 63 years old, she had delivered more than 400 babies in Shepherd's Hollow and the surrounding areas. She knew every woman of child-bearing age in the valley. She tracked pregnancies with a mental calendar more accurate than any medical chart, anticipating due dates based on the subtle signs only decades of experience could teach. In March of 1953, Margaret sat in her kitchen, one of the few in the valley with a working stove powered by a gas line installed the previous year, reviewing her mental roster. By her count, there should have been 5 births that month. She had attended to each expectant mother regularly, monitoring their progress, ensuring they had adequate nutrition, preparing them for labor. But March passed without a single birth, not one. The first explanation was simple: dates could be miscalculated. Women sometimes confused their cycles, especially in a community where formal medical care was scarce, and where tracking such intimate details felt uncomfortable, even shameful to discuss openly. Margaret made her rounds, visiting each of the 5 women she'd expected to deliver. What she found disturbed her in ways she couldn't immediately articulate. Sarah Jenkins, who should have been days from delivery, appeared to be barely 6 months along. Her belly had seemingly shrunk. When Margaret performed her examination, pressing her experienced hands against Sarah's abdomen, feeling for the baby's position, she found the infant's movements weak, lethargic. The heartbeat, when she pressed her ear to Sarah's stomach in the traditional way, was faint and irregular. "Something ain't right," Sarah whispered, her hands trembling as they rested on her diminished belly. "I can feel it. The baby don't move like it did. Sometimes I think it ain't even there no more." The same pattern repeated with the other 4 women. Pregnancies that should have reached full term appeared to have regressed. Babies that should have been preparing for birth seemed to be growing smaller, weaker. The women reported the same sensations: reduced movement, strange cramping, a feeling they described as emptiness, despite the physical evidence of pregnancy remaining visible. Margaret had delivered babies in conditions that would horrify modern medical professionals. She'd worked by lamplight during power outages, managed breech births without surgical intervention, saved mothers who were bleeding out through sheer determination and herbal remedies passed down through generations. She considered herself unshakable, but this was different. This was wrong in a fundamental way that her experience couldn't explain. April brought 3 more expected deliveries. Margaret attended each with growing dread. None of the babies came. The pregnancies continued their strange regression. Women who should have been in labor looked as though they were barely pregnant at all. Their bellies deflated gradually, like balloons with slow leaks. The babies inside seemed to be dissolving, returning to whatever mysterious realm they'd come from. By May, the women of Shepherd's Hollow began to whisper among themselves. In a community where gossip traveled faster than any modern communication system, the pattern was becoming undeniable. 8 women who should have given birth were still pregnant, but their pregnancies were failing in ways no one had seen before. The babies weren't being stillborn. That terrible tragedy was familiar enough in Appalachia. They weren't being miscarried in the traditional sense either. They were simply vanishing. Mary Caldwell was the first to lose her baby completely. On May 7th, she woke to find her belly flat, the tightness of pregnancy gone as though it had never existed. There was no blood, no pain, no physical evidence of a miscarriage. Her body had simply returned to its pre-pregnancy state overnight. It was like God reached in and took the baby back. She told Margaret, her voice hollow with shock. Like he decided I wasn't worthy after all. Margaret examined her thoroughly. Mary's body showed no signs of having carried a nearly full-term pregnancy. Her cervix was unchanged. Her breasts, which should have been preparing for nursing, were not engorged. It was as if the pregnancy had been erased, wiped from existence without leaving the physical trauma that normally accompanied such loss. Within 2 weeks, 3 more women experienced the same phenomenon. Pregnancies that had progressed for months simply disappeared. The women woke to find themselves unchanged, unburdened, but devastated by a loss that left no physical trace. The community began to fracture under the weight of this inexplicable tragedy. Reverend Thomas Whitmore, who had shepherded the Shepherd's Hollow Baptist Church for 32 years, held a special prayer service. The small church building, white, painted wood with a modest steeple, filled beyond capacity. People stood in the aisles, pressed against the walls, desperate for answers, for comfort, for some explanation that could make sense of what was happening. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Reverend Whitmore intoned, his deep voice echoing off the plain wooden walls. "We may not understand His purpose, but we must trust in His plan. Perhaps this is a test of our faith. Perhaps we have strayed from His path, and this is His way of calling us back." The sermon provided little comfort. In fact, it opened a dangerous door. The suggestion that the community's suffering was punishment, that they had somehow earned this curse through their sins. The whispers grew darker. Old Ned Pritchard, who claimed to remember stories from his grandmother about the valley's early days, spoke of ancient Cherokee lands. Shepherd's Hollow, he insisted, had been a sacred site for the native people who'd been driven out in the 1820s. Perhaps, he suggested with the conviction of the very old or the very drunk, the land itself was rejecting the settlers who had stolen it. The Cherokee had a word for this place. Ned said one evening at Hoskins General Store, the community's informal gathering place. They called it the Hollow of Quiet Spirits. Said it was where children's souls came to rest before being born. We built on top of that sacred ground. Maybe the spirits decided we ain't welcome no more. The story spread through the valley like fever. It mixed with Christian theology and mountain superstition in ways that would have been fascinating to anthropologists, but were simply terrifying to the people living through it. Some began leaving offerings at the edge of the forest food, small handmade items, even precious coins, hoping to appease whatever force was stealing their future. Margaret Thorne watched this descent into superstition with growing frustration. She was a woman of practical knowledge, of empirical observation. There had to be a medical explanation. There had to be something concrete, something fixable. On May 23rd, she made the difficult journey out of the valley to consult with Dr. Franklin Hayes in Clarksburg, the nearest town with a proper hospital. The trip took 6 hours by truck over treacherous mountain roads, but Margaret was determined. She brought her detailed notes, dates, symptoms, observations recorded in her careful handwriting. Dr. Hayes listened with the polite skepticism of a man trained in modern medicine, confronting folk medicine observations. He was 47 years old, educated at Johns Hopkins, and had little patience for what he privately considered mountain superstition. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, glancing at her notes, "what you're describing is medically impossible. Pregnancies don't regress. Fetuses don't simply vanish. These women are experiencing miscarriages, traumatic. Certainly, but explainable. The emotional state of the community is likely causing psychological symptoms that feel real, but are ultimately psychosomatic. I know what a miscarriage looks like," Margaret replied, her voice steel wrapped in mountain politeness. "I've attended hundreds. This ain't that. These babies are fading away while still inside the womb. The women can feel it happening, and it's every single pregnancy in the valley. Every single one." Dr. Hayes paused at that. His skepticism wavered slightly. In his training, he'd learned that when an entire population showed the same symptoms, environmental factors often played a role. "Let me make some inquiries," he said finally. "I'll contact the state health department. If there's an environmental cause, contaminated water, perhaps, or something in the coal mines, they'll need to investigate." Margaret returned to Shepherd's Hollow with hope that someone with resources and authority would finally take the situation seriously. But by the time help arrived, the nightmare would deepen in ways no one could have anticipated. Dr. Edwin Marlowe arrived in Shepherd's Hollow on June 9, 1953, driving a pristine black Ford sedan that looked absurdly out of place on the rutted dirt road that served as the valley's main artery. He was a representative from the West Virginia State Health Department, a man of 42 with thinning hair, round spectacles, and the bearing of someone who believed deeply in the power of science to solve any problem. He was accompanied by two assistants, Robert Chen, a recent graduate from the University of Michigan with a focus on environmental health, and Patricia Montgomery, a registered nurse with experience in rural medicine. Together, they represented the most significant official attention Shepherd's Hollow had ever received. Margaret Thorne met them at the valley's entrance, where the dirt road narrowed between two massive rock faces that seemed to guard the hollow-like stone sentinels. She had dressed in her best clothes, a simple but clean dress, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her hands scrubbed raw from nervous washing. "Dr. Marlowe," she said, extending her hand, "thank you for coming. I know this must seem strange to outsiders, but I promise you, what's happening here is real." Dr. Marlowe shook her hand with professional warmth. "Mrs. Thorne, any cluster of medical anomalies deserves investigation. We're here to help, not to judge." As they drove into the valley, Dr. Marlowe made notes on a clipboard, his trained eye cataloging every detail. The narrow valley walls, the limited sunlight, the visible poverty, the coal smoke hanging in the air. The creek running through the center of the community. "Tell me about the water supply," he said. "Is that creek the primary source?" "For most folks, yes," Margaret replied. "Some have wells, but they're shallow. Most of the wells tap into the same groundwater that feeds the creek anyway." Dr. Marlowe exchanged a glance with Robert Chen. Contaminated water was often the culprit in community-wide health crises. It would explain why pregnancies throughout the valley were affected. They set up a makeshift clinic in the schoolhouse, which had been closed for the summer. The interior was sparse, worn wooden desks, a chalkboard with children's writing still faintly visible, walls decorated with hand-drawn pictures of families and farms and mountains. Patricia Montgomery arranged a basic examination area, hanging sheets to provide privacy, setting out the medical equipment they'd brought. Over the next 3 days, every woman of childbearing age in Shepherd's Hollow was examined. The results were disturbing. Of the 19 women currently pregnant in the valley, all showed the same alarming signs. Ultrasound equipment, primitive by modern standards but cutting-edge for 1953, revealed fetuses that appeared developed, mentally stunted. Their growth had not just slowed, it had reversed. Babies that should have been 7 or 8 months along measured closer to 5 months. Their heartbeats were weak and irregular. Their movements were minimal. More disturbingly, several women who had experienced the complete disappearance of their pregnancies showed scarring in their uterine tissue. Not the kind associated with miscarriage or trauma, but a strange web-like pattern of scar tissue that Dr. Marlowe had never encountered in his entire career. "It's as if the tissue is being reabsorbed," he murmured, studying the findings, "but that's not how human biology works. Once fetal tissue develops, it doesn't simply dissolve." Robert Chen focused on environmental testing. He collected water samples from the creek, from household wells, from the mine drainage that trickled down the mountainside. He tested soil samples from gardens and farmland. He examined the coal dust that covered every surface in the valley with a fine black powder. The coal mines themselves became a primary focus. Shepherd's Hollow Mine Number 3 was a small operation by industry standards, a drift mine that tunneled into the mountainside, employing about 40 men who extracted coal in conditions that would horrify modern safety inspectors. The mine had been operating since 1907, cutting deeper into the mountain with each passing decade. Robert descended into the mine with 2 local miners as guides. The interior was a maze of tunnels, some reinforced with timber supports, others merely carved from the rock and held up by hope and prayer. The air was thick with coal dust. Water dripped from the ceiling. The temperature was constant, a damp, uncomfortable 55 degrees Fahrenheit that seeped into bones. At the deepest point, they could safely reach approximately 800 feet into the mountain. Robert noticed something unusual. The rock face showed a different color, a greenish, gray vein running through the coal seam. "What's this?" he asked, running his gloved hand over the unusual deposit. "Been there long as I can remember," one of the miners said. "We just mine around it. That rock's too hard to cut through, and it don't burn worth nothing." Robert chipped off a sample, sealing it carefully in a glass container. The greenish tint reminded him of copper compounds, but the texture was wrong. It was smooth, almost waxy to the touch, and unnaturally cold even in the constant temperature of the mine. Back at the surface, he ran every test available with the equipment they'd brought. The results were confounding. The sample contained trace amounts of several heavy metals, lead, mercury, arsenic, but not in concentrations high enough to explain the widespread pregnancy failures. There were also organic compounds he couldn't identify, molecular structures that didn't match any known mineral or chemical substance in his reference materials. "We need to send this to a proper laboratory," Robert told Dr. Marlowe. "Whatever this is, it's beyond field testing capabilities." While the medical team worked, the community watched with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Some families welcomed the doctors, desperate for answers. Others saw them as outsiders who couldn't possibly understand the true nature of what was happening. The divide between scientific and supernatural explanations deepened. Emma Forrester, age 79, the oldest woman in Shepherd's Hollow, began sharing stories that had been whispered among the oldest families for generations. She spoke of the valley's founding in 1824, when her great-grandfather, Josiah Forrester, had led a group of families into the hollow, fleeing religious persecution in Virginia. Josiah wrote in his diary, "I got it still, passed down through the family about strange lights in the valley at night." Emma said, her voice quavering but clear, "Floating lights that moved through the trees like they was searching for something. The Cherokee they encountered warned them not to settle here, said it was a place between worlds, where the veil was thin, where spirits could pass through easier than other places." She produced the diary, its leather cover cracked and worn, pages yellowed with age. Dr. Marlowe examined it skeptically, but the handwriting was clearly authentic, the dated entries consistent with 1820s grammar and spelling. One entry in particular stood out, dated October 3, 1825. Asterisk, "The lights came again last night. Martha insists they are spirits of children yet unborn, waiting their turn to enter the world. The Cherokee woman, Aida, who has shown us kindness despite our intrusion, says this is the Gateway Valley. She says children's souls gather here, drawn by something in the earth itself, something ancient. She warns that if we disturb the balance, the souls will withdraw and the valley will become barren. I fear she speaks truth, but we have nowhere else to go." Asterisk, the diary suggested something that seemed absurd to modern scientific thinking, that Shepherd's Hollow had always been different, had always existed in some state of supernatural significance. But it also provided a pattern, periods of normal fertility followed by periods of mysterious infant mortality or pregnancy failures, occurring roughly every 75 to 80 years according to Emma's recollection of family stories. The last bad time was in the 1870s, Emma said. Lasted near about 2 years. Women couldn't carry babies to term. Then one day it just stopped. Births started happening again like nothing had ever been wrong. Dr. Marlowe was torn between his scientific training and the accumulating evidence that something genuinely inexplicable was occurring. The medical findings were concrete: pregnancies were failing in medically impossible ways. The environmental testing suggested contamination, but not at levels that would cause such dramatic effects. And now historical records, however anecdotal, suggested a recurring pattern. On June 15th, the first baby died. Catherine Walsh had been 4 months pregnant when the regression began. By mid-June, her pregnancy had diminished to what appeared to be about 6 weeks along. On the morning of June 15th, she woke to severe cramping. Margaret Thorne was called immediately. When Margaret arrived at the Walsh house, a two-room cabin near the center of the valley, she found Catherine in considerable pain, but without the bleeding that typically accompanied miscarriage. The examination revealed that the fetus had died in utero. Its tiny heart stopped, but it was not being expelled naturally. Dr. Marlowe and Patricia Montgomery rushed to assist. What they encountered would haunt them for the rest of their professional lives. The fetus, when finally removed through careful medical intervention, was not just deceased, it was desiccated, mummified, as if it had been dead not for hours but for months. The tissue was paper, thin, brittle, drained of fluid. It weighed almost nothing. "This is impossible," Dr. Marlowe whispered, holding the tiny, impossibly light form. This level of dehydration would take weeks under desert conditions. "This baby died this morning." Patricia Montgomery, who had maintained professional composure throughout the investigation, excused herself and vomited outside the cabin. Robert Chen, examining the tissue samples later, found that the cellular structure had collapsed at the molecular level, something that shouldn't occur in recently deceased tissue. The death shattered any remaining optimism. If the pregnancies were failing, if the babies were dying in these inexplicable ways, then every expectant mother in the valley was in danger. Dr. Marlowe made the decision to recommend evacuation. "I'm advising all pregnant women to leave the valley immediately," he announced at a community meeting held in the church. "We don't yet understand what's causing these pregnancy failures, but we cannot risk more deaths. There are facilities in Clarksburg that can provide proper medical care and monitoring." The response was divided. Some families immediately began preparing to leave. Others refused, insisting they wouldn't abandon their homes based on the recommendations of outsiders who'd been in the valley less than a week. "This is our land," Jacob Pritchard said, standing in the church aisle. "5 generations of my family have lived in this hollow. We ain't running because of some mystery nobody can explain. If it's God's will that we suffer, then we'll suffer here in our home." Margaret Thorne found herself caught between worlds. She respected Dr. Marlowe's medical expertise, but she also understood the deep-rooted attachment these families had to the valley. Leaving meant abandoning everything: homes, jobs in the mine, community ties that went back generations. For many, it would mean poverty and displacement. "What if we can't afford to leave?" Sarah Jenkins asked, her voice breaking. "What if we got nowhere to go? You're asking us to give up everything on the word of doctors who admit they don't understand what's happening." It was a valid point. The families of Shepherd's Hollow lived on the economic margins. They couldn't afford hospital stays or rent in town. They couldn't abandon their sources of income. For them, leaving the valley meant potential destitution. 7 families ultimately decided to leave. 7 pregnant women and their families packed what they could carry and made the journey out of the valley, accepting temporary housing assistance arranged by the state health department. The other 12 pregnant women remained. Dr. Marlowe and his team stayed as well, setting up a more permanent medical station. If the women wouldn't leave, then medical care would come to them. Patricia Montgomery moved into a spare room in Margaret Thorne's house. Robert Chen continued his environmental testing, growing more frustrated as each test failed to provide definitive answers. The samples sent to the state laboratory in Charleston came back with results that only deepened the mystery. The greenish mineral from the mine contained elements that didn't match known substances. The molecular structure was complex, organic in some ways, but with crystalline properties that shouldn't exist in organic compounds. One chemist's notes included the phrase, "requires further analysis," possibly prehistoric biological origin. Meanwhile, the valley itself seemed to be changing. The mist that had always been present grew thicker, more persistent. It lingered even on sunny days, a white fog that clung to the valley floor like a living thing. The temperature dropped noticeably, unseasonably cool for June, then July. Plants in family gardens grew stunted or not at all. The creek's water took on a slightly milky appearance, though tests showed no increase in harmful bacteria or chemicals. And the lights began. On July 4th, Independence Day, a date heavy with irony, multiple residents reported seeing strange lights in the forest at night. Not the steady glow of flashlights or lanterns, but floating orbs of pale blue, white light that moved through the trees with apparent purpose. They appeared most frequently near the old mine entrance and along the creek bed. "They're the spirits," Emma Forrester insisted. Just like Josiah wrote about, "They're gathering again, but this time they're not coming to bring children. They're coming to take them away." Robert Chen, ever the scientist, attempted to photograph the lights. He set up equipment and waited through several nights. On July 9th, he captured something blurred images of luminous shapes that couldn't be explained by conventional means. They appeared to be moving intelligently, avoiding obstacles, congregating in specific areas. Ball lightning, Dr. Marlowe suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Or perhaps some kind of bioluminescent fungus. At 75 feet above the ground, Robert countered, pointing to the tree heights where the lights had been observed. Moving against the wind, appearing and disappearing without leaving any trace. The rational explanations were crumbling. Something was happening in Shepherd's Hollow that defied the scientific paradigms of 1953. Something that possibly defied any paradigm. On July 16th, the second baby died, then the third on July 20th. Both followed the same terrible pattern pregnancies that had regressed to early stages. Sudden in utero death, mummified tissue that seemed to have been drained of life force itself. The women who had evacuated, by contrast, were showing improvement. Reports from Clarksburg indicated that their pregnancies had stabilized, some even showing signs of normal development again once they were outside the valley. The conclusion was inescapable. Something in Shepherd's Hollow itself was causing the pregnancies to fail. Something localized, something that lost its power beyond the valley's boundaries. But what, and more importantly, why now? Why, after nearly 80 years of normal fertility, had the valley suddenly become hostile to new life? The answer, when it finally came, would prove more terrible than anyone imagined. On July 28, 1953, a mine collapse changed everything. It began with a sound, a deep, resonant crack that echoed through the valley like thunder from underground. The entrance to mine number 3 belched dust and debris. Inside, 3 men were working the deep shaft where Robert Chen had collected his mysterious mineral sample weeks earlier. The rescue operation mobilized immediately. Every able-bodied man in the valley rushed to the mine. They worked through the night, clearing debris, shoring up unstable tunnels, calling into the darkness for signs of life. All 3 miners were found alive, trapped but uninjured in a pocket created by the collapse. But when they emerged, their story brought new horror to an already nightmarish situation. "There's a cavern," Thomas Whitaker said, his face gray with coal dust and something deeper. A fear that went beyond the normal terror of being buried alive. "Behind where we were working, the collapse opened it up. There's something in there, something that ain't natural." Dr. Marlowe, Robert Chen, and several valley residents descended into the mine the following morning. They brought powerful electric lanterns, more light than the mine had ever seen, and professional mining equipment borrowed from the larger operation in the next valley. The collapse had indeed revealed something extraordinary. What had been solid rock face now showed a jagged opening about 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, large enough for a person to crawl through. Cold air rushed from the gap, carrying a strange mineral smell that was both metallic and organic. Robert Chen went in first, despite Margaret Thorne's protests. The cavern beyond defied immediate comprehension. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet high, supported by natural limestone pillars that had formed over millions of years. But it was the walls that commanded attention. They were covered in veins of the greenish mineral, but here, unexcavated and undisturbed, the true extent was revealed. The veins formed patterns, intricate, almost deliberate designs that seemed too regular to be natural geological formations. They pulsed with a faint luminescence, creating enough light that the electric lanterns became almost unnecessary. And throughout the cavern, rising from the floor like strange crystalline trees, were formations unlike anything in geological records. They resembled petrified wood, but the structure was wrong, too regular, too symmetrical. Each one stood roughly 6 feet tall, shaped like narrow spires with multiple branches extending at regular intervals. Robert approached the nearest formation carefully, his scientific mind cataloging every detail even as his instincts screamed danger. The surface was smooth, almost glassy, but warm to the touch despite the cool air. The greenish color was more pronounced here, with veins of deeper green and occasional flashes of blue running through the material. He touched it. The sensation was electric, not literally, though his hand did tingle, but in the sense of connection, of suddenly understanding something vast and incomprehensible. Images flooded his mind, ancient seas covering the mountains, organisms unlike any in the modern world, a time when life itself was different, when the rules governing biology were still being written. He jerked his hand away, gasping, "We need to document this," Dr. Marlowe said, his voice filled with scientific wonder that temporarily overrode the grim circumstances that had brought them here. This could be a completely unknown geological formation, possibly biological in origin. This could rewrite our understanding of "It's alive," Robert interrupted, his voice shaking. "Or it was alive, recently alive. This isn't ancient, this is active." Over the next several days, the cavern became the focus of intensive study. Robert Chen took samples, careful not to disturb the formations more than necessary. Dr. Marlowe attempted to document the structures through photography and detailed sketches. Margaret Thorne, who had insisted on entering the cavern despite her age, stood in the center of the space and simply observed, her midwife's intuition working on a problem that science seemed unable to solve. The analysis of new samples from the cavern revealed startling information. The formations contained organic compounds that resembled both plant and animal cells, but were neither. They showed signs of metabolic activities, low, barely measurable, but present, and they emitted low-level radiation, not dangerous in short exposures, but persistent. More critically, they seemed to be absorbing something from their surroundings. Water analysis from inside the cavern showed dramatically reduced levels of certain trace elements, specifically iron, calcium, and other minerals essential for fetal development. The formations were pulling these nutrients from their environment, concentrating them within their strange crystalline structure. "It's a parasite," Robert said during a meeting in the schoolhouse turned medical center, or more accurately, a competing organism. It's drawing the same nutrients from the environment that developing fetuses need. The creek water, the soil, everything in this valley is being depleted. The women's bodies can't get what they need to sustain pregnancies because this organism is consuming it first. But why now? Patricia Montgomery asked. If this has been here for millions of years, why did it suddenly become active in 1953? The answer came from an unlikely source. Jacob Pritchard, the miner who had most vehemently opposed evacuation, brought his grandfather's mining logs to Dr. Marlowe. They were crude records, barely legible, but they documented the mine's expansion over decades. "Look here," Jacob said, pointing to an entry from February 1953. "That's when we broke through into the new seam. We thought we'd hit a jackpot, deeper coal, better quality. We started working that section hard in March. The month the births stopped, we disturbed it," Margaret Thorne said quietly. "When the miners broke through to that deeper section, they exposed the cavern. Maybe not fully, but enough to change the air flow, the temperature, something. They woke it up." The theory was supported by the evidence. The greenish formations showed signs of recent growth, newer layers on the outside of older core material. They had been dormant, possibly for decades or even centuries, preserved in the isolated, stable environment of the deep cavern. The mining activity had introduced fresh air, changed the humidity, altered the delicate balance that kept them sleeping. And when they woke, they began feeding, drawing nutrients from the soil, the water, the very air of the valley, creating a zone of depletion that extended roughly 4 miles in any direction, coincidentally, the exact length of Shepherd's Hollow. The question of what these formations actually were remained unanswered. Robert Chen's best hypothesis was that they represented a form of life from the deep geological past, something that had survived in suspended animation in isolated underground chambers, perhaps since the Carboniferous period when this region had been swampland. When exposed to modern conditions, they awakened and resumed their ancient life cycle. But this explanation raised more questions than it answered. If they were ancient organisms, why did they specifically interfere with human pregnancies? Was it merely competition for nutrients, or was there something more targeted, more purposeful about their effect? Emma Forrester had a different explanation, one rooted in the old stories. "They're the keepers," she said. "That's what the Cherokee called them in the old tales. They guard the souls of unborn children, hold them in this valley until the time is right for them to be born. But if you disturb the keepers, if you break their sacred trust, they close the gateway. No souls can come through. No children can be born." It was mythology, superstition, the kind of primitive explanation that science had supposedly moved beyond. Yet it matched the observed reality in ways that pure geology and chemistry could not. The debate between scientific and supernatural explanations became irrelevant in early August, when the situation deteriorated catastrophically. By August 5th, all 12 remaining pregnant women in the valley had lost their babies. Not through birth, not through traditional miscarriage, but through that terrible dissolution, the slow draining of life force until nothing remained but desiccated tissue and grief. The valley itself seemed to be dying alongside its unborn children. Gardens produced no crops despite careful tending. Trees began losing leaves months early. Wildlife disappeared. Deer, rabbits, even birds became scarce. The creek's flow diminished to a trickle, and the lights grew brighter, more numerous, congregating around the mine entrance and the homes where women mourned. Dr. Marlowe made the formal recommendation that Shepherd's Hollow be permanently evacuated. The state of West Virginia, faced with a medical mystery that defied explanation and threatened public health, agreed. On August 15, 1953, government officials arrived with trucks and offers of relocation assistance. The remaining families were given 2 weeks to pack their belongings and prepare to leave. The departure was devastating to witness. Families who had lived in the valley for 5 generations loaded their possessions onto trucks, furniture, photographs, tools, everything that could be carried. They left behind houses their great-grandparents had built, graves where their ancestors were buried, a way of life that had sustained them for over a century. Mine number 3 was officially closed, the entrance sealed with concrete and steel, but sealing the mine didn't seal the cavern. The formations remained deep underground, feeding on the nutrients they'd been denied for decades, growing stronger, expanding their influence. The 7 families who had evacuated early gave birth successfully in the months that followed. 7 healthy babies entered the world in Clarksburg and surrounding towns, children who might not have survived had they remained in the valley. The 12 women who lost their pregnancies were never able to conceive again. The physical trauma wasn't visible, but the scarring ran deep, emotionally, psychologically, and in ways that medical science of the 1950s couldn't fully measure. The story of Shepherd's Hollow officially ended in September 1953, when the last family departed. The valley was declared uninhabitable by the state health department. A chain was placed across the entrance road with signs warning of dangerous conditions. But the story didn't truly end. Stories like this never do. Robert Chen continued studying the samples he'd collected, working in laboratories across the country to understand what they'd encountered. His published paper in 1956, Unknown Biological Formations in West Virginia Coal Deposits, was largely dismissed by the scientific community as poorly supported speculation. The samples themselves proved unstable outside their natural environment, degrading rapidly once removed from the cavern. Dr. Marlowe never fully recovered from the experience. He left the state health department in 1955 and opened a small private practice in rural Maryland, where he reportedly refused to discuss Shepherd's Hollow with anyone, not even his family. He died in 1973, and his personal papers about the case were never found, possibly destroyed, possibly sealed away somewhere still waiting to be discovered. Patricia Montgomery became an advocate for rural health care, working tirelessly to bring medical services to isolated communities. She spoke occasionally about Shepherd's Hollow, always emphasizing the human cost. The women who lost their children, the families displaced from their ancestral homes, the trauma that echoed through generations. Margaret Thorne relocated to Clarksburg with several of the evacuated families, continuing her work as a midwife until she was physically unable to do so. She delivered the babies of women who had been children in Shepherd's Hollow. and sometimes their children as well, 3 generations removed from the valley, but still carrying its mark. She kept detailed records of every birth, noting with relief that none of the children or grandchildren of Shepherd's Hollow survivors showed any lasting effects from their parents' exposure. She died in 1978 at age 88, and her obituary in the Clarksburg newspaper included a single line about her role in the Shepherd's Hollow medical crisis of 1953. Most readers, if they noticed the reference at all, had no context for understanding its significance. The valley itself remained empty for decades. Nature reclaimed the houses, pulling them down board by board. The church steeple collapsed in a winter storm in 1967. The schoolhouse burned in a lightning strike in 1971. By the 1980s, there was little physical evidence that 317 people had once lived in that narrow valley between the mountains. But the cavern remained, deep underground, sealed behind tons of collapsed mine shaft and concrete. The formations continued their mysterious existence, continued feeding, growing, waiting. In 1993, 40 years after the evacuation, a team of speleologists explored the limestone caves in the mountains surrounding Shepherd's Hollow. They discovered a natural entrance to the cavern system, miles from the sealed mine entrance. Their photographs and samples confirmed what Robert Chen had suspected. The formations were still active, still growing, their influence extending through underground water systems and geological fractures. The state of West Virginia quietly purchased the entire valley and surrounding 1,000 acres in 1995, creating a geological preserve that was closed to public access. The official reason cited was unstable mine shafts and dangerous terrain. The real reason remained buried in sealed government documents. Researchers who have reviewed the limited available records have proposed various theories. Some suggest the formations are indeed ancient organisms, possibly extremophiles that survived in isolated underground environments for millions of years. Others propose they might be mineral formations with unusual electromagnetic properties that interfere with human biology. A few, working at the fringes of acceptable science, have suggested they might represent something genuinely paranormal, a physical manifestation of what various cultures call spirit energy or life force. The truth remains elusive. What is certain is the human cost. 12 women lost their children in ways that defied medical explanation. Dozens of families were displaced from their ancestral homes. An entire community was scattered to the winds, its history largely forgotten except in the memories of survivors and their descendants. The women who lost their pregnancies in Shepherd's Hollow rarely spoke of their experience. The trauma was too deep, too personal, too incomprehensible to share with those who hadn't lived through it. They carried their grief privately, marking the anniversaries of children who were never born, mourning futures that were stolen by forces they could neither understand nor fight against. Some turned to faith, finding comfort in the belief that their children's souls had simply returned to wherever they came from, waiting for another chance at life. Others struggled with anger, directed at the mine operators who broke through to the cavern, at the government that failed to protect them, at a universe that seemed randomly cruel. A few, in their later years, spoke of dreams, recurring visions of floating lights, of underground chambers, of children's voices calling from the darkness. Were these trauma-induced nightmares or something more? The question remains unanswered. The story of Shepherd's Hollow remains a disturbing reminder that despite our technological advancement, despite our confident assertion that science has answers for everything, there are still phenomena that resist easy explanation. There are still places where the boundaries between the known an unknown blur in unsettling ways. But questions remain, haunting in their persistence. What exactly were, or are the formations in the cavern? Are they truly ancient organisms awakened from deep time, or something else entirely? The samples that degraded outside their natural environment hint at biological processes we don't yet understand, life forms that operate on principles different from conventional biology. Why did they specifically affect pregnancies? Was it simply nutrient competition, or was there something more targeted about their influence? The Cherokee stories of soul keeping suggest possibilities that science dismisses but cannot definitively disprove. Perhaps consciousness, life force, whatever we call that spark that animates living beings, operates on frequencies or principles that occasionally intersect with the physical world in ways we haven't yet learned to measure. Could it happen again? The formations remain active in their sealed underground chamber. They continue to grow, to metabolize, to exert their mysterious influence. The valley may be empty of people, but it's not empty of power. And boundaries are porous things. Underground water flows, minerals leach through stone, influences spread in ways that don't respect human imposed barriers. To this day, the area surrounding Shepherd's Hollow remains sparsely populated. The nearest town, Clearmont, lies 8 miles from the valley's entrance, and even there, residents report unusually low birth rates compared to neighboring counties. Statistical analysis has been inconclusive. The numbers are within the range of normal variation, but the pattern is there, subtle but persistent. Hikers who ignore the warning signs and enter the valley report unusual sensations, feelings of being watched, sudden temperature drops, and yes, the lights. Particularly on foggy nights, particularly near the old mine entrance, pale blue orbs still dance through the trees, moving with apparent purpose, congregating and dispersing in patterns that defy explanation as natural phenomena. Local teenagers, as teenagers do, occasionally dare each other to spend a night in the valley. Most turn back before reaching the old settlement site, driven away by an indefinable sense of wrongness. A few who persist report nightmares for weeks afterward, dreams of underground chambers, of children who were never born, of lights that pull at something deep within the soul. And on silent nights, when fog settles thick in the mountain valleys, when the moon is hidden behind clouds and the darkness is absolute, people in the surrounding area still report hearing sounds from Shepherd's Hollow. Not the sounds of wildlife or wind, but something else. Something that sounds almost like singing, high-pitched and ethereal, as if children's voices are carried on the breeze from a place where no children have lived for over 70 years. The scientific community has moved on. The case of Shepherd's Hollow is mentioned occasionally in medical journals as an unsolved mystery, a historical curiosity that defies modern understanding but lacks sufficient documentation. Serious study. The sealed government files remain sealed, classified under regulations that protect sensitive medical information, or perhaps protect something else. But for those who lived through it, for the descendants of families torn from their ancestral home, for the women who lost children in ways that broke every rule of human biology, the mystery is not academic, it is deeply, painfully personal. They know what they experienced. They know what they felt. The sensation of life draining away, of futures being stolen, of forces beyond human comprehension exerting their will over the most fundamental human experience. And they know, though they may not speak of it often, that something in Shepherd's Hollow is still there, still active, still waiting. The formations grow, the lights appear. The valley remains closed, guarded not just by chain, link fences and warning signs, but by something far more primal. the instinctive human recognition that some places are wrong, some boundaries should not be crossed, some mysteries are dangerous to pursue. We live in an age that promises answers for everything. We map genomes, split atoms, send machines to other planets. We believe, with the confidence of the modern era, that sufficient research and resources can solve any problem, explain any phenomenon. Shepherd's Hollow stands as a humbling reminder that this confidence may be premature, that there are still dark corners where our understanding falters, where the rules we think govern reality prove insufficient, where ancient things sleep fitfully and should not be disturbed. The 12 women who lost their children understood this truth in the most painful way possible. They paid the price for human arrogance, the assumption that we can dig wherever we want, disturb whatever ancient equilibrium exists without consequence. The valley remembers, the formations remember, and somewhere in the darkness beneath the mountains, in chambers sealed from human access, but not from the slow workings of geological time, something continues its mysterious purpose, guarding, consuming, or simply existing in ways we cannot fully comprehend. If this journey through one of Appalachia's darkest medical mysteries resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering the boundaries between science and the inexplicable, between what we know and what we fear to consider, then consider subscribing to the Untold Hour. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time that deserve to be examined with the seriousness and respect they demand. Leave a like if this account provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, if it reminded you that the universe still holds secrets that humble our understanding. Comment sharing your own perspectives on where science ends and mystery begins, on what we owe to the past and how we should approach forces we don't fully understand. These stories matter, the people who lived them matter, their experiences, however inexplicable, however uncomfortable, deserve to be remembered, examined, and respected. Not sensationalized, not dismissed, but honored as genuine encounters with the edges of human knowledge. Until next time, remember that the mountains keep their secrets well, but they sometimes share them with those willing to listen. Stay curious, stay skeptical, but also stay humble before the vast unknown that surrounds our small islands of certainty. This has been the Untold Hour.